So Samantha Dempsey's presentation title aptly summarizes my initial impression of her portfolio. When I received her portfolio, I was ecstatic. Communicating science so fits who she is at her nature. As a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and their RISD-Maharam STEAM Fellowship program, exhibiting artist Samantha Dempsey seeks to engage her design expertise in service to policy concerns.
Hi, so as Olga said, I'm Samantha Dempsey, and I'm a graduate recently this spring of the Rhode Island School of Design in the illustration department. I'm also an alumni of the Maharam STEAM Fellowship, and I'm also an exhibiting artist downstairs in the show. But I'm here today to talk about the intersection of science and art, this gray area where the two combine, and in particular, the importance of communication. This was one of my first forays into that gray area. It is a complete failure. And I'm a little embarrassed to show it because you can't tell what this is about as an audience. You don't know that this is about Oliver Wendell Holmes discovering the communicability of childbed fever. But that's what I made it about. So after making a bunch of art like that no one could understand, I decided that I wanted to make art that didn't just describe science. I wanted to make art that could affect science. I wanted to position myself squarely in the gray area between the two of these and ask what me, as an artist, as a designer, could bring to the science that I was so inspired by and in love with. So I started with one of my favorite areas, biology. In particular, extinction. So in extinction, if you're a cute animal like the panda, you get all sorts of attention and therefore funding. But if you're an ugly animal like St. Helen's giant earwig, then no one cares about you. They also don't give you any money, even though they're both equally important to genetic diversity on our planet. So if I wanted to get people to start caring about the giant earwig as much as the panda, I just had to think about how do people show they're caring about loss as humans. So I started thinking about commemorative tattoos. Think R.I.P. Mom. How could I change this to have people have tattoos that said R.I.P. Shrimp or R.I.P. Giant Earwig? So I made these designs for commemorative tattoos of three particularly unsavory extinct species: the Florida fairy shrimp, the oblong rock snake, and St. Helen's giant earwig. Now these designs follow traditional commemorative tattoos in both their image and their text. But I wanted to do more than just make images. I wanted to make this an awareness campaign. So I put these images on models and these models on posters. So these posters will be posted around Providence, Rhode Island. In addition, these same tattoos will be made into temporary tattoos that will be handed out at local events so that Rhode Islanders can wear the actual tattoos to show their awareness. So this was done mostly me working by myself with a couple of my professors, and I realized that I needed to start actually working with scientists. So I was able to join a RISD and Brown University class called Communicating Medical Risk that was about half pre-med students and about half designers, and that was us. And together we worked to really figure out what is the truth behind data. What do we need to communicate with data? How do we visualize this and how do we understand this? And really, how do we create a personal connection? This is an example of a decision aid we made to help people visually understand how different medications would affect their atrial fibrillation. The next step was that I was lucky enough to be awarded a Maharam STEAM Fellowship. Now, this fellowship given to RISD students supports us to go into fields that don't traditionally see artists and designers, especially when those fields affect public policy. I used my fellowship to go to the Mayo Clinic Center for Innovation, which is a unique space. It is a studio of designers embedded in a live clinical setting. This means that there are doctors, designers, and managers working together to better the tomorrow of healthcare. But they'd also never had an illustrator there. So I got there and I asked them, what can I do to help you? What don't you feel like you are communicating? What visuals can I give you to really get this message across? And I worked with every platform there. And this was one of my first. This is a comic. It was designed to help communicate the principles of primary care redesign. The series of comics was placed around the clinic and around the community to try to help people understand what changes were happening while we redesigned the primary care and why. I also started sitting in clinical discussions between doctors and patients in the exam rooms. This is an example of a map that I made of those discussions. This helped patients understand that these medications and these diagnoses weren't just being thrown down on them from above, but were really the result of a shared decision-making process between them and their doctor. I also worked with genomic sequencing, the most complex thing I'd ever encountered. And the designers and doctors working on that felt the same way. They wanted me to have a visual, to make a visual for them that would help keep the patient and doctor interaction at the forefront of this complex process and at the same time explain it. This is a still frame from an animation that I did for them. Then I was able to start my final project and my favorite. I made a kit for collecting visual patient narratives. And this kit allows doctors and researchers to go, and designers, to collect the patient narratives of people in the clinic about their experiences. And it also lets it be done visually. Now, why would I do this, you might say? Well, in a clinic, which is a very numbers-based setting, the qualitative data is often overlooked in favor of the quantitative data. This qualitative, fluffy stuff is seen as not as really important. But in terms of the patient experience, that fluffy stuff, like whether your doctor asks you how you're feeling, can have an incredibly important impact. I also wanted to get people to start thinking visually, and I wanted people to think differently, and that's the same thing. If I ask you, tell me about that time you broke your leg, you're going to give me a canned story that everyone's heard 100 times before. But if I say, draw for me about that time you broke your leg, you're going to start thinking differently. So I made a kit including tools and maps to try to get people to have a different structure for their thinking by doing it visually. In the bottom right, this is a body map. I asked patients to draw their understanding of their illness both inside of their body and outside. This woman shown here started talking about chakras and her understanding of health as a balance between body and outside the body. Now, if I had asked her to talk about her rheumatoid arthritis verbally that she was in the hospital for, we would have never had this kind of conversation about her larger understanding of health. So getting people to talk visually, actually, patients revealed different aspects of their care. I was also able to direct patients to talk about different parts of their stories by using different maps and tools. So I was able to affect my research through the visuals. So in the end, science and art have a lot more in common than I think any of us realize. And I think that we are also the best when we work together. Design is not something simply to be brought in at the end to make data pretty. Design is something that affects our relationship with science and also affects the way that we make science. Thank you.